we're going to need a bigger printer. What do you do when you want to print a 3D insert for your board game, but the pieces are too big to fit on your printer bed? Well, that exact thing happened to me when I went to print a 3D insert for A Feast for Odin and the expansion, The Norwegians. And I'm going to be showing you a couple of ways to take a 3D model and split it in half so that those pieces will fit on your bed and you can print them no problem. That's happening right now on this episode of Bits Please. Once I started getting into the hobby of 3D printing, I became keenly aware that I was just producing more plastic cruft to gum up the environment. So I wanted to make sure that with each project I tackle, I was producing something that I would get use out of. That's why I like to start off Bits Please episodes by illustrating the problem, maybe so I can justify the project. But first, how do you justify supporting Knights Around a Table on Patreon? You know, how do you make it right? Well, that's simple. You just press Ctrl-R. Command-R on a Mac. So this is the problem. This is a game called A Feast for Odin and its expansion, The Norwegians, is by a game developer called Uwe Rosenberg. And Uwe Rosenberg games are famous for having a bazillion different wood pieces and cardboard pieces and cards, chits, tokens, just stuff everywhere. Look, this is why the box is so thick. And usually Uwe Rosenberg games don't have any sort of insert to speak of. So I'll show you another Uwe Rosenberg game that I own. This one's called Ora et Labora. And I'll show you a solution that a lot of Uwe Rosenberg game owners gravitate towards. This is called a Plano box. So it's, you know, like a thing that you'd put maybe a tackle or pieces for jewelry making in. And it holds all the myriad chits that you need to play the game. And it's fine, it's serviceable, but it's nothing like having a custom tailor-made insert to fit every piece exactly and beautifully. By the time they developed A Feast for Odin, they had anticipated the need for some sort of storage solution, but they didn't want to blow the bank publishing anything that would fit the game really nicely. Now, that's money, and that eats into your overhead as a publisher. So what they did is they gave you one of these with the game. This is a component tray that you might be familiar with if you play war games. And I don't really play war games, you know, stuff like from publishers like GMT. But this is a component holder you can put a whole pile of flat chits in. One thing that bugs me about this is that it's molded in plastic, but it doesn't have scooped bottoms. And that's one of the big advantages that a plastic insert can give you. It can give you scooped bottoms so it's easier to dig stuff out with your fingers. The other problem I have with the solution is that all the chits need to go in here and they need to be flipped to a certain side. So all of the greens need to go into this row and all the blues need to go into this row. But the tiles are double-sided and they flip over really, really easily inside these buckets. So especially when you're just learning the game, it can be hard to fish them out in the proper side and to really be reinforcing that there's like a color hierarchy system to the game. This just kind of drives me nuts. There has to be a better way. So let's check out Thingiverse.com and see if anybody's designed anything to fix this problem. As usual, what we're hunting for is the gold standard of custom printed 3D inserts for board games. We're looking for something that fits the base game and its expansions in the original game box with no box lift. Box lift is where the insert doesn't quite fit everything, so they made it a bit taller than the box, and the lid fits a few millimeters or a few centimeters higher than it should. All right, we know what we're after. To Thingiverse. So let's see here. We got this one, A Feast for Odin, but it doesn't look like it fits the expansion. Aha, but this one says it fits the base game and the expansion, The Norwegians. And look at that, it looks pretty good. So this one that fits The Norwegians is by Stinkfoot71, and it is a remix of this original one, which was designed by Cnpeters. So I did download this one, but the problem is, as soon as I put the first piece into my slicer, look, it doesn't fit my printer bed. But that's the problem that I'm here to help you solve. So let's download a piece of software called Blender and get cracking. So here we are in Blender 2.9.2, and for my money, this is the best free piece of software I think you could possibly get your hands on. You left click to get rid of this screen, and you're left with the 3D world. You see the x-axis, the red line going along here, and the y-axis going along here. And we're missing the blue axis that goes up and down, that's Z. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit a key and go down to screencast keys so that you can see which buttons I'm pushing to do what I'm doing. So this thing right here is a cube, and we don't need it. If you click over here, it deselects the cube, click on the cube to select it, and hit delete, and there it goes. Now, like a lot of pieces of software, Blender has a native file format, and we don't want to mess with that native file format. That's what you get when you hit File, Open. We actually want to import a non-native file format because that's the sort of file that it people save to when they put things up on Thingiverse, because it's more generic. It can be used in a bunch of different 3D pieces of software. So it's called an STL file. So we want to go down to import STL, and from the list, pick the big piece that won't fit on the printer. You won't see it necessarily right away, but we can see the edges of it up here because it's gigantic. And in order to see the whole thing, we have to scroll the middle mouse wheel and pull out like that. And now we can see that whole piece that won't fit on the printer bed. If I hold down my middle mouse wheel and move the mouse around, I can actually rotate this in 3D space. I'm not actually rotating the piece, I'm just rotating the entire world so I can see it at different angles. Now there's a bunch of different ways that we could possibly split this up into two halves, but I think that I've struck upon probably the fastest way that I can think of. If you can think of a faster way to do this, please let me know down in the comments. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a plane, which is just a flat 3D object, and we're going to use it sort of like a cheese knife to slice down through the middle of this object and cut it into two halves. So to do that, we have to hit Shift A, go to Mesh, and select Plane. You can't see it, but if you scroll right in, there's the plane that we're talking about. If you see it, it's sort of like flat or parallel to the rest of the piece, which is what we don't want. We want it sort of up on its end so it can slice through the piece. So to do that, we're going to have to rotate it. Which way are we going to have to rotate it? Well, along this green line. If you picture this as like a teeter-totter, and that's the fulcrum in the middle of the teeter-totter, that's how we want it to rotate. So to do that, we hit R. We want to rotate it 90 degrees around the Y. So if we type Y, it'll constrain it to that axis, and you can see the Y axis light up. Then type 90 and enter, and boom, it just rotates it the exact way we want. Now it's a little bit small, of course. It's going to cut a very small piece of cheese. So if you hit S to scale it, and just move your mouse a bunch until it gets big enough, we want to make sure it goes all the way through the piece. So look at that, and you can picture that's kind of like a cheese knife. Beautiful. Now to actually do the cutting, we're going to use what's called a Boolean modifier, which is where you can use one shape to cut into another and then keep either one half or the other, or the difference or the union between those two shapes. So grab our Boolean modifier, go over here to the wrench and click Add Modifier. There's a bunch of different ones you can choose from, but in the second column, you want to choose Boolean. And then it wants to know which object we want to perform this Boolean operation with. So click on the eyedropper tool and select our big piece that we're trying to cut. Now you won't see anything happen, but stuff is happening in the background. You want to hit intersect. And now what you see is just half of that big piece is highlighted. And one reason why you see the other half of the piece is because that original piece that we're trying to cut is still there in the 3D world. If we hide it, we won't see that anymore, and all we'll see is this half piece. So click on the original piece and hit the H key, and that hides it. And what we're left with, look at that, is exactly half of the piece, which will hopefully fit on our printer bed. So if you select it, we want to get it out of Blender as an STL file. So go up to File, hit Export, STL, find out where you're going to put it. I'm going to call it half bottom. And then I like to hit Selection Only, because that allows you, if you have a bunch of different things in your 3D world and you just want to export one, you select it, and if you hit Selection Only, you'll only get an STL file with that one thing. So hit Export STL. And then over in your slicer, I use Ultimate Cura, hit File, Open Files, and choose that piece that you just made, and look at that. It's tight, but at half, when we cut it in half, that half just barely fits on the bed. If we were to put a skirt around this, it would not fit. So make sure you've got skirt disabled. You can do that over here in advanced settings by hitting skirt. So watch this. If I put a skirt on it, like, forget about it. It's not going to fit. But as long as I get rid of everything, none, we go to none. Raft isn't going to do it. Brim's not going to do it. As long as you got nothing extra, it will just barely squeak in there. Great. But how do we get the other half? Well, back in Blender, if we go back to hit difference, this is what was actually going on before we hid that other piece. That's what the difference effect looks like. And we want to see the other half, and we can do that by taking this plane and rotating it to face the opposite direction. So we're going to rotate it 180 degrees around the Z-axis. Remember the Z-axis that we can't see. The blue, invisible blue line is going to go straight up and down through the middle, and you can sort of see that up here. You can picture the Z going up and down. So if I hit R, constrain it to Z by typing Z, and then type 180 and enter, now it's facing the exact opposite direction. And if we go back to intersect, look at that. It's the other half of the piece that we wanted. So just like the first time, File, Export, STL. This time we'll call it half bottom 2. And in Cura, we'll get rid of this one. Open half bottom 2, and there it is. Now you can print both of these pieces and fit them on your printer. So let me show you another way to easily cut your model if you don't want to mess around with Blender, although I do recommend learning some stuff in Blender so that you can eventually maybe create your own stuff. This is a free piece of slicing software called Prusa Slicer. I'm going to go to File, Import, and bring in that big STL that won't fit on our printer bed. Now Prusa Slicer has a feature called Cut, where you can move this little square around and cut your object. But notice how it's not really proposing to cut along the axis that we need it to cut along. We don't need this to cut in half like that. We need it to cut in half the other way so that we can, make two halves and fit them on our printer bed. So what we have to do is rotate the piece first. Select the piece and click this rotate button. Then you get this big orbital rotator, so you can go along the x-axis to rotate it like that, or you can go along the z-axis to rotate it like that. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo both of those because we don't really want to free rotate. We want to rotate exactly 90 degrees along the blue axis, whatever this piece of software wants to call that. Let's try along here. Is that it? Nope. Let's try. There we go. So that's up where we want it. Now if we hit the cut button, I don't want to touch it. It's exactly in the middle and I want to just perform cut. Boom. There they both are. They're independently selectable. And I can -90 to put that back flat to the bed. But there you go. I would just, delete this one, print this one, and then undo. Control-Z, delete this one, print this one. And you're off to the races. Now the joke was on me because I should have checked the remixes section on Thingiverse first. If I had, I would have discovered that someone named Kind-S had already made a split up version of that first tray, so all my efforts were for naught. But I still think it's worth going through the motions and showing you how to do it in this episode because you're not always going to have Kind-S to bail you out. Splitting up big models so that they fit your printer bed is a great skill to have. I had this beautiful roll of blue PLA that I wanted to use for this project, but I didn't quite have enough of it, so I thought I would split it between green and blue so that I could sort of match the colors on those island boards. As I was printing the very last piece of the insert, I was getting down to the end of the roll of blue. You could see like the single strands of PLA going around the spool. So I was like, oh, where am I going to get more blue? I had cut two ends off the piece for some other project, so I thought, oh, I'll splice those in there. So I stuck in one through the extruder and then another one right after that. And that's why while this model is printing, you can see those two lines, those clear demarcation lines where it switched, there's a little bit of a gap and it ate up the next segment of blue plastic. And then following the blue, I fed the green in. But I was hoping that I had just enough blue to print out this last little Viking player holder. Let's watch what happened as it got down to 98% through this print job.
Right there.
99%. The green has reached the hot end. It's got about, 2 inches to go before it reaches the nozzle. Will we see green? Oh, are we seeing green now? We are. We're seeing the tiniest little bit of green at the top. Oh no.
Yep.
Oh, the last, layer? 2 layers are gonna be green. So close. We needed like an inch more of plastic, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, look at that. Yeah, it was so close. There's like 2 layers of green on top. And just on these 2 sections too. That's okay, I still think it looks pretty cool. Well, now that we've got all the pieces printed, let's assemble the insert for A Feast for Odin and the Norwegians. So there it is. That's how it looks when you're all finished. This is a very, very nice insert. Here, I'll take a couple trays out to show you. Everything's really neatly organized. All of those tiles are the right way up so that you can see the different, bands of color, the orange and the red and the green and the blue, the way that they're supposed to be, the strata of powerful objects. Now, one thing I will say is that it's not as easy as just chucking these tiles in one of those component trays, right? You have to sort of meticulously stack each one, and it can be a little bit fiddly to put it away after a game's done, that's for sure. But it's a trade-off for having them so nicely organized. One complaint I do have, though, is that this tray, which purports to fit all of your islands, if I can get it out, there we go, is actually too high. Your islands go over the edge of it, and that's because in different printings they use different thicknesses of stock. So in the printing that I have, I just had thicker stock on those islands and they don't quite fit. But that's okay, because once again, if we check the remixes on Thingiverse, user Victorum has modified this file so that it's a bit deeper and fits all of those island boards. Plus, I believe the islands you get as the mini expansions for the games. But I haven't printed that one out, so I can't vouch for it. Another thing you'll find if you look in the remixes is that user Gormash found that he has little stickers to bling out his Vikings, and with the stickers on the Vikings it makes them thicker, and it's a tight fit in here that you squeeze them into these component trays. So Gormash has a remix on Thingiverse that you can print that gives a little bit more space to those Vikings. And finally, if you're fortunate enough to have the mini expansions for this game, there are a few extra components and they don't fit in this thing as designed, but there are remixes that you can find on Thingiverse, like this one from Sylfire, that'll enable you to fit all of the mini expansion stuff into a redesigned container. One more comment I'll make is that I wish, and this is going to sound super greedy because these designers, nobody's paying them, you grab the stuff off of Thingiverse for free, so I feel like a bit of a rat saying it, but I wish that more designers would make keys or legends that you could print out and stick in with the board game, because figuring out how to put all of these trays back in the box it's a little bit of like a jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces can fit each other, but they'll only fit one way, you know what I'm saying? So maybe it's sort of like a side project, I might actually work on a little key that you can print out and stick in there and shows you how to put everything back in. That's it. What a project. I highly recommend it if you have a 3D printer and you own this game. It makes setup a breeze. Not necessarily teardown, but certainly setup is a breeze. And I hope I helped you out by showing you how you can split stuff up to make it fit your printer bed. If you would like to see a parody of this insert, yes, a parody of a 3D board game insert, isn't that a deep cut? Then you gotta check out this Brothers Murph episode where they satirize putting all your components into a heavily designed, over-designed 3D board game insert just so. I thought it was really funny, check it out. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll catch you next time on... Did you just watch that whole thing? Oh, hey, to 100% this video, click the badge to subscribe, and then click the bell to get notifications when I've got new stuff.